Hi, thanks for clicking on this video. We're here at Trinity Wesleyan Church so that we can unleash hope to those around us, and that includes you. So thank you for being a part of what's going on in our church, even through technology. We hope that this video is a blessing to you, and at the end, you're going to see some next steps and ways that you can get involved even after this video is done.
God says to Elijah, I got your back. I've already made plans to sustain you. So yeah, you might be a little bit lonely in the place of separation, but it's when you're lonely, you see what it's like to have God as your friend. It's when you are tired that He becomes your strength. It's when you are hungry that you experience the bread of life. It's when you are insecure, you discover what it's like for Him to sustain you as your security. When you are empty, you realize what it's like for Him to fill you up. You learn what it's like to trust in the sustaining power of your great God. He becomes your provision and your provision alone.
We're going to keep going in our series that we started last week called The Fight to Flourish. And we've been talking about how, like last week, we talked about how you are born to fight and that you are born to flourish. Not fight like go punch people, but you're born to fight for the things that are good for you and the things that that we don't think that we deserve. And we are deserving of flourishing because God is with us. It's not a prosperity gospel sermon, but we're going to get right into the series, into the scripture here, and we're going to open to Job chapter 1. Job chapter 1 today. It says, in the land of Uz, there was a man whose name was Job. And we just started out, but it's important to note that Job was not an Israelite. He was not connected with other Israelites of that time. This is just another man who was following God. And he lived in what would be modern day Jordan or Saudi Arabia, kind of on that border, likely close to this place called Wadi Rum, which is a place, here's the picture of it. It's a place that is in a disputed kind of area. It's kind of desolate, kind of not a good place for farming, agriculture, that type of stuff. But this is what Job had. I want you to think about this place as I read the rest of the scripture. And test me in the scripture. Like, make sure that I'm actually saying what's in the scripture. Like, actually go back and check and make sure that I'm not just saying whatever I think, but this is from scripture as well, too. You can read this for yourself later in Job chapter 1. But it keeps going. It says, this man, Job, was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. Verse 6, it says, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it, just kind of, just hanging around. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. And Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Verse 13, it says, "One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, 'The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.' While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, 'The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants. I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.' While they were still speaking, another messenger came down. 'The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put your servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.' And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came. 'Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house.' Then, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." Job was a good person. He was a good person. It says that he was blameless. He was upright, good citizen, basically. Blameless, upright, followed the law, followed the morals. He feared God. Feared God is not like afraid of God, but it's a fear or respect for God. Like Niagara Falls, one would be crazy to swim near the falls, under it, or above it, because you know your limits because of its power. Like, you know you shouldn't go swim there because of its power. I'm not saying you can't go to Niagara Falls, but you fear the falls or respect the power, and you have an awe or majesty at what it is. And so this is what he was fearing God. He was respecting his power and in awe and majesty of who God is. Job also shunned evil. He was pure in heart. He sacrificed for his children, even if they had possibly done something. He wanted to make sure his kids were taken care of. Now, this is not something that is typical of a modern day Christianity, because this was back before Jesus came in the sacrifice and resurrection. But we have to make that decision for ourselves. Like your mom, your dad, your grandparents can't save you or sacrifice for you, blah, blah, blah. But he sacrificed for his children, and that's kind of how it worked back then. He was not perfect. He's not saying that Job was perfect, but the writer was saying that he was exceedingly righteous. Exceedingly righteous with his devotion, his respect, and his obedience to God. Like, I would say that Job is entirely sanctified, like we talked about last week. Last week we talked about being sanctified. That's when you first accept Christ and he starts moving and changing things in your life to help you become closer to him. Sanctified is the process, the getting rid of the bigger pieces. But entirely sanctified is that refining, like the polishing, making it look nice and making it as close to a perfect match as you can to who Jesus is. So I would say that Job was entirely sanctified. That doesn't mean you don't sin. You sin less and less, but you are fully obedient to Christ, and you're in the refining, beautification process of our lives. Job was a good person. That's what I'm trying to say. But Job still lost everything. He lost everything. He lost his oxen and his donkeys. He lost all of his sheep. He lost all of his camels. He lost all of his children. He lost everything. In a few hours, he lost absolutely everything. This is why this is important. So he lost his oxen and donkeys. The Sabaeans came and took those, and he lost all of his sheep because of the fire of God that came down. Now, this wasn't something that God had enacted, but it was a process that God had enacted from a long time ago. Like, he set the weather into motion, and yes, he can control it, but it's kind of one of those things he set into motion, and it does what it does. But the fire of God that they're talking about, if you look into the context of it, and if you look into how it was used in other places, the fire of God in this instance has to do with what we would call lightning. So lightning came down and killed all of his sheep, all of the things for his sacrifices. He lost his oxen and donkeys. He lost his livelihood. He was likely like a rancher, farmer type person. Yes, he was the family priest, basically. But his livelihood was farming. He was, I would say, a bigger farmer than most people because he was one of the greatest people of the East. So he was very wealthy and had done very well for himself. So he lost his livelihood. He lost the ability to sacrifice to God. He lost the ability with his camels to travel and show off his wealth. He lost all of his children, 10 of them. His wife was spared, and she was alive, but she resented God after she lost all of these things. In a few hours, Job lost every single thing that he had. He lost all of his comforts. He lost all of his backup plans. He lost all of the ways that he can connect with God. Now, that one seems kind of crazy to me, that he lost the ability to make sacrifices to God at that point. Because it's like, well, if I'm going to be close to God, there's no sin in God, so I need to sacrifice so that I can be close to God. But here is showing that God is more excited when we truly want to be with him. It's not always about the sacrifice. It's not always about the giving of things. It's not always about that. But he's saying that, okay, so you don't have your livelihood, you can't travel, there's no comfort in your kids. Like, you go from being a father of a lot of kids to a father of 0 kids. And he lost his ability to sacrifice. And God's allowing this to happen, allowing this testing and these trials to happen to show Satan that Job is upstanding. He is an outright upright person that will follow God in any single thing that he is called to. And all these things that he went through was not because of any wrongdoing that he did. They were not even punishments for his sin. And so we go into this and we look more into what's going on. Satan, which is an important distinction. Satan, not God. Satan did not force the Sabaeans and the Chaldeans to do things against Job that they didn't want to do. But Satan accomplished his plan by using the character of already evil people. They were already going to do that, whether it's to Job or somebody else. And he was using them, influencing those people to come and do what God was allowing to happen. And so we read this scripture from Job, and we hear about this story, and actually goes on further, and Job loses his health. He has all these scabs and boils that go all over him, and he's kind of like cutting at these things to kind of like drain the boils and drain all these things. He lost his good health, so he lost every single thing that he had in later chapters. But he still didn't curse God. And it begs the question as we read this and as we hear this, why do bad things happen to good people? Job was a good person. He was blameless, upright, feared God, respected God, shunned evil. He was a good person morally and spiritually. So why did God allow this to happen? Why did God allow Job to lose everything? It just seems messed up. Like, this person's following you. Why would you take what is going well for them? And so many people, myself included, and when we ask God, we say, why do bad things happen to good people? And why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people is another story for another day. We're going to stick with the why do bad things happen to good people. Now, there's two different ditches that you could fall into when you ask that question. Why do bad things happen to good people? The first ditch that you can fall into is that God is powerful, but God is not loving. God is powerful. He can do anything he wants, but he's not loving, because why would a loving God allow pain and turmoil to a good person that's already following God? Why would God allow that? It seems like he's just like, I'm powerful. I'm going to do whatever I want. If I want to kill, if I want you to lose stuff, you're going to lose stuff. That's the first ditch that you can fall into, that God is powerful but not loving. The second ditch on the other side of the road that you can fall into is that God is loving, but he can't stop evil. Why would a powerful God allow evil to happen to good people? He's loving, but maybe he's not powerful enough to do this. Maybe he can't actually stop this. Maybe he's not all powerful. Why would a powerful God allow evil to happen to good people? While we can't deny that God is all powerful when it comes to sin, we also can't deny how evil the world is. Like, there's those two ditches on both sides of the road, and you can pull your car off into either ditch, but I mean, if you're driving, don't you want to stay on the road? And what's in the middle is that God is all powerful, but he is also all loving at the same time. God is a loving God even in the midst of when evil things happen. The world is evil. But we also must consider, if God is a perfect God, and if he's loving, and if he was all powerful, that when it comes to sin, when it comes to this moral evil and this natural evil, we must view this in the light of the fall that took place due to Adam and Eve's decision to eat from the tree of good and evil. Like, the world's messed up. It's not the way it was supposed to be. The world's messed up, and that's not the way that God had intended the world to be. Adam and Eve were supposed to start out, they were supposed to listen, they were supposed to follow God. There would be no pain, there would be no sorrow, there would not be any evil in this thing, but humanity brought evil into the world. And so now, because we are all from two people, we come to this point where we're like, if you look at a toddler, you know that there's evil in people. And not like toddlers are just doing it because they just want to be jerks, but that's the fallen nature of even little kids. Little kids that want to do what they want to do, and they don't want to listen all the time, and they want to throw fits, and they want to, when they don't get their way, they're going to smack somebody or steal a toy back or do what they want because it feels right. That is evil in the world, and that's why we as parents have to say to our kids, no, you can't do that. This is the way it's supposed to be. We need to follow God. We need to follow what is good and moral. You can't just, an adult, go to a store and be like, hey, this looks good. I'm just going to take it. I want it. We have to realize that the world is messed up, and this is not the way that the world was supposed to be. After Adam and Eve had sinned and they ate from the tree of good and evil, after they ate from this tree, God said that man would work by the sweat of his brow, and he would always be working, and that women would have pain in childbirth. And if you look into the pain that they're actually talking about, it's a frustration, a longing, a difficulty in bearing children, not in childbirth. You actually look at it in the context and what the words that were used actually mean, that there's going to be a difficulty in bearing kids. And we see that to this day. There's a lot of our friends from college, they can't have kids. Not because they're bad people, but because it's the nature of the fallen world that we live in. There's a man by the name of Saint Irenaeus, and he was called a defender of the faith. He's called a defender of the faith. Now, he came up with this argument against the issue of evil that proves God must be real. And he said that the evil in the world is the result of the changeability and corruptibility of the world, free will, and that the world is corrupted. And he says that though people are created in the image of God, that image of God in us is corrupted. And we have free will. Like, I can just move my mic around. Like, there's no reason for that. We have free will. There's no reason for me to change my hat and do it to the side. God's not forcing me to do it. I'm just doing it because I can. I have free will. He's not forcing me to do it. And it's because of the actions of men and women that many bad things happen. Since everything created is capable of being corrupted, the fact that it is messed up does not mean that God is not real. You think about the internet. There's so many good things that we can do on the internet. Just because its purpose was for good, people have corrupted it, and it's actually changed the internet where you can get pop-ups on things that you didn't even realize. You can accidentally get onto a pornographic site. You can accidentally have pop-ups. You can accidentally have malware and viruses that get onto your computer just by going to a website that you thought was real. And you can get scammed by people from other countries, and you can get scammed by people in our country. And you can, and there's so many things that happen on the internet, but even further into the dark web. And there's so many evil things that happen on the internet that we know in the dark web that are so evil. But it was made with the intention of goodness. It was made to help people find information. Evil is not God's will, but He only allows it. Because God wanted to let us have that free will, He allows us to make dumb decisions as well as make good decisions. In the midst of these ignorant decisions, though God can use the circumstances to bring good to this world. And this includes God using hard situations to make people stronger and have a different perspective on life. Because God can always find a way to make the situation good, and we can learn to see His good in those situations. And God's love causes Him to respond to bad and evil in the world through His healing and provision. It's not like He just leaves us in the evil and is like, well, that stinks. Sorry. But God's love causes Him to say, man, that's terrible. I want to show you how I can redeem this, how I can help you heal through this, how I can help you find the best that can happen for you and for the other people around you for my glory. Though God doesn't cause every action, good or bad, He can use any and every situation for His glory and for your healing. We go to the New Testament in James chapter 1. Now, James is the author, wrote a book called James in the Bible, and he's writing this letter to the 12 scattered tribes throughout the nations. This is another group of people going through terrible persecution due to things that other people are doing to them. Babylon and Assyria are kicking them out of their land because they're following Jesus. They're doing terrible things to them. They're killing them. They're persecuting them. And James writes to them and he says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." Yeah, pass. It sounds terrible. I don't want to do that because it sounds difficult. But there's this tricky word that's used in the Bible, and especially in this passage, it's called joy. Consider it pure joy when you have trials. But here's how we read this as people who know English. Here's how we read this. Be happy when things are terrible. I stubbed my toe. Woohoo! I burnt our food tonight. Yeah. I lost my job. So excited. And that doesn't make sense. Jesus teaches the opposite of that. Jesus doesn't teach that be happy when things are terrible, because Jesus wept when his friend Lazarus died. Jesus said that we will have trials and troubles. He said, but take heart, I have overcome the world. We got to look at the context of what's going on. I always talk about location, location, location. It's all about where it's set and who it's speaking to and who it's about. But we go back to the context of it. It says, consider it pure, this Greek word chara, which means calm delight. Consider it calm delight when you face trials. Happiness does not fit this definition. Joy does. Consider it pure joy or calm delight when you face trials. So we got two words, calm and delight. There's calm, not panicking, focused, clear-headed, the sound mind that Paul tells his protege, Timothy. Calm delight. Delight is the word pleased, from the Hebrew word that really means soft or pliable. Consider it focused development. Soft or pliable. Consider it focused development when you face trials of many kinds. It doesn't say consider it to be happy when things are going terrible. Happiness is an emotion, but this focused development, this joy is something that helps you throughout these things to see the end goal in mind. When you face trials, remember that these trials are to develop your focus. You can have joy knowing that trials are going to refine you, that they're going to strengthen you. It will help you focus on what actually matters in your relationship with God. But we get to this point where we think, you know what, trials and joy doesn't work. Like trials, terrible. Joy, happy. But when we read it in the context, trials are difficult. Joy is realizing that in those trials, we are being developed to focus on God. Trials and joy are actually compatible. It's not saying that God is causing these trials. It's not saying that he is making these things and that God is evil and that God is not loving and God is not powerful. But it is purposeful. And there's a profound understanding of the human mind when this is written and what this is talked about. When we study the human mind and we realize our need for God and we need for things to be healed and need for things to be fixed, that trials and joy can coexist dependent on these three focuses. Trials and joy can coexist. They are compatible, and it's only if you focus on all three of these focuses. The first one, we have to focus on the future. We go to Romans chapter 8. Paul's writing to the Romans, and he says in chapter 8, verse 18, he says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. There is a focus on the future when you are realizing that you are in a focused development through your trials. I consider that the things that I'm going through today are not worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us when Jesus heals us, when Jesus helps us, when Jesus is refining us and processing our lives to chisel and mold us into that soft and pliable material so that we can focus on the end goal. The end goal is not my lifetime. The end goal is the eternal. In the difficulties, it's hard to focus on the future. And some days it feels like you're just minute by minute, hour by hour, you're just trying to get through. But when you are going through trials, when you're going through hardship, that if you focus on the future, you remember that, you know what? And I've thought about this myself. When I'm going through hard days or I'm going through a hard season or I'm going through a hard part of life, that I have to think to myself, you know what? Actually, this will be done at some point. At some point, it's not going to affect me, or at some point, it's not going to tear me down, or at some point, I'm going to be able to actually have this day where this is not an issue. We have to focus on the future. The second thing we have to focus on is to focus on other people. We go to the next verse, verse 19. It says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed." We have to focus on the future, and we have to focus on other people. How much time do we spend per week on social media? How much time do we watch the news or read the newspaper? What if instead of watching the news just to consume content or be on TikTok or Instagram, what if we use that time that as we go through every single post or we go through every single article, and instead of just like scrolling through, they actually call it doom scrolling, where you're just scrolling and you're not getting anything. Instead of that, what if we take a moment and pray over each situation? That when you see something, that you see somebody's having a great time, God, thank you for letting them have a great time. Thank you for the joys that you give us in this life. It may not always be sunshine and roses, but there are good days, and I thank you that that family's doing that, or that person is able to go rest and relax, which is also a commandment from God. Or you see somebody and you're going through and they're having a hard time. Take a moment to pray. What if instead of just us doom scrolling for hours, what if we prayed for the person on the other side of that post? What if we focus on other people? And I think when we focus on other people, we realize that the things that we're going through, yeah, they are hard. They're difficult. But when we focus on other people, we realize that other people hurt too, and we're a part of that solution. We're a part of showing them who Jesus is and showing them what hope is. And the third and last thing that we need to focus on is to focus on God. And it seems like duh, but like we go to this next verse and it says, "For the creation was subjected to frustration." Again, the word that is used, the frustration, the pain in childbirth or childbearing. For creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into freedom and glory of the children of God. If we're not focusing on God through these things, what's the point? If we're just focusing on being alive and getting through and making sure that we have the best time, the best life, and we're not focusing on what God is calling us to do in those difficult times, maybe God is saying, hey, you need to take a step back and realize what's actually important in your life. That you need to understand that I am chiseling, I'm molding you into something that is not the person that you think you are, but the person who I've created you to be. So trials and joy are compatible. But without any of these focuses, without future, without others or God, without future, that means we have no hope. If there is no future to this, if there is no point in all of this that we're going through, if there is no good and evil, if there is no, which we know is true, that there is good and there's evil, if there is none of that, if there is nothing after this life, we go back down into the dirt, the worms eat us, blah, blah, blah. Without a future, if we don't focus on the future goal, there is no hope for us in this life. Without other people, if we don't focus on other people, there's no purpose in us going through the pain that we're going through. Again, I'm not saying that God is causing every single thing that you're going through, or that God caused it, and I'm not saying that you can't hurt. It's hurt. It hurts. Life is sometimes just terrible. But if you don't focus on others, there's not a purpose in having the pain on earth. And if you aren't focused on God, there is no comfort on earth that will ever sustain you. Not your money, not your family, not your friends, not your job. Without God, there is no comfort in the pain that you're going through. Like Job, he broke Job down to nothing. God allowed Job to go through those things, to find that his comfort is in him. His comfort is in Jesus. His comfort is in following God and doing the things and not cursing God and respecting and fearing God. Trials and joy, there's not a disconnect there. It's purposeful. There's a profound understanding of the human mind and our need for God. And yes, bad things happen to good people every single day. Every single day. And it's hard and it's difficult. Sometimes God allows those things to happen. Sometimes God heals those people, as we have even seen in our church that people healed in front of us. And sometimes it's just because people are terrible. But in any and every situation that you're going through, God will use it. He will heal and He will restore for His glory. As we close today, let us be reminded of these words from 1 Peter chapter 4. And this is a message paraphrase. I want you to take this with you this week. This is from the Message version. It's a paraphrase. It's not specifically Scripture. It is taken exactly from Scripture. But I think it's turned in a way that it allows us to understand it a lot better. And that's why I'm reading from the Message paraphrase. Friends, when life gets really difficult, don't jump to the conclusion that God isn't on the job. Instead, be glad that you're in the very thick of what Christ experienced. This is a spiritual refining process with glory just around the corner. Again, that's 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12 and 13. I want you to focus on the future. I want you to focus on others, and I want you to focus on God, because that's how trials and joy can be compatible. Because God is not just leaving us high and dry, but He is restoring us to the place for the future, this eternal, and anything that happens on this earth is just a blessing.